Hello, dear listeners of Z Sci-Fi Stories. Thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization, leaving our channel without the budget needed to operate. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 to help us pay our hardworking team so they can cover their living expenses and continue creating more stories for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. The galaxy laughed at the hairless apes from Earth, tossing their warnings into the void like crumpled pieces of trash. The high lords of the cosmos chuckled from their gleaming thrones, secure in their infinite wisdom and unbroken dominance. They did not know that their laughter was the final sound of a dying era. They did not know that humanity would answer their mockery not with anger, but with absolute, suffocating silence. The central chamber of the Ethelgard core station was a cathedral of arrogance, constructed from cold light and frictionless metal. It was a space designed to make a single individual feel utterly insignificant. At the center of the vast, circular amphitheater stood Evan Burke, Earth's diplomatic representative and lead astrophysicist. The air around him felt thin, practically vibrating with the collective condescension of 1,000 different species. Evan stood straight, his dark suit a stark contrast to the shimmering, bioluminescent robes and gravity-defying armors of the alien delegates towering above him. He had just spent the last 45 minutes laying out the mathematical certainty of their doom. Hovering above his podium was a holographic representation of the Galactic hyperspace network, a glowing web of intricate transit lanes. At the edges of this web, pulsing in an angry, cancerous crimson, was the anomaly he called the quantum tear. It was not a localized storm. It was a fundamental unraveling of space-time, slowly and silently, eroding the very pathways that held the galactic economy together. High on the central dais, looking down with eyes that resembled polished obsidian, sat the Krillian chairman. The Krillians fancied themselves the ultimate architects of the universe, an ancient and supreme race whose bodies were elegant, elongated constructs of pale flesh and embedded crystalline technology. To them, human engineering was little more than banging rocks together in a cave. Representative Burke, the chairman's voice cascaded down from the acoustic amplifiers, smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. We have listened to your impassioned little story. It is quite imaginative. However, the Council's own temporal seers and spatial weavers have monitored the hyperspace currents for 10,000 cycles. What your primitive sensors register as a tear is merely a natural fluctuation, a slight breeze in the vast cosmic ocean. Evan did not flinch. Chairman, the data is completely transparent. If you look at the decay rate at Sector 7, the energy bleed is exponential. Within a matter of months, the underlying fabric will snap. Instead of offering a scientific rebuttal, the chairman simply raised one long, translucent finger. The grand projection of Evan's meticulously calculated anomaly was violently hijacked by the station's core processor. The crimson, cancerous tear morphed. The glowing lines of the hyperspace network twisted and curled inward. Before the eyes of the entire assembly, Evan's apocalyptic warning was reshaped into a shimmering, holographic music box. A crude, mechanical rendering of a human monkey wearing a tiny top hat popped out of the box, holding miniature symbols. The hologram began to emit a series of ridiculous, tinny popping sounds, accompanied by a jovial, off-key carnival tune. The silence of the Great Hall shattered. It started as a low rumble from the heavy gravity delegates of the outer rims, then escalated into a cacophony of multi-tonal laughter. The insectoid ambassadors from the Vexillium hives clicked their mandibles rapidly in a chittering symphony of amusement. The gelatinous envoys of the aqueous worlds bubbled and shook. their bioluminescence flashing in erratic patterns of pure delight. The Krillians did not laugh outright, but their lips curled into identical, pitying smiles. The entire galactic assembly was vibrating with joy at this public smearing. They were highly entertained by the terrified delusions of the newly spacefaring, hairless apes from a wet rock on the absolute fringe of civilized space. The noise was deafening, a physical wave of mockery washing over the podium. Yet, Evan Burke did not turn red. His jaw did not clench. His pulse, monitored by the biometric threading in his collar, remained perfectly steady at 65 beats per minute. The coldness inside him was far deeper than anger. It was the absolute clarity of an engineer watching a bridge collapse after his warnings were ignored. He did not raise his voice to shout over the carnival music. He simply reached out and tapped the console, powering down his personal data drive. He meticulously stacked his physical backup files, aligning the corners perfectly. He pulled a heavy silver pen from his breast pocket and opened a small leather notebook. Glancing up at the grand chronometer floating near the ceiling, he wrote down a single line of text. He recorded the precise moment the mockery reached its peak, noting the time as 14:02 Galactic Standard. Evan capped his pen, slid it back into his pocket, and buttoned the single center button of his suit jacket. Without offering a bow, without uttering a single word of protest or farewell, he turned his back on the supreme rulers of the galaxy. His heavy leather shoes echoed softly against the glass floor, a steady, rhythmic march that cut through the dying echoes of alien laughter. He walked out of the grand chamber and into the sterile corridors of Ethelgard, completely swallowed by the silence of his own making. 3 days later, seated in the dim, cramped cabin of a diplomatic courier ship hurtling back toward Earth, Evan sat alone. The rhythmic hum of the sublight engines was the only sound in the darkness. Spread across the metallic table before him was the original blueprint of the quantum tear, the exact mathematical proof of the impending collapse. He traced the glowing red lines with his index finger. A profound, heavy realization settled over him. The Galactic Council had not just rejected an astrophysical report out of arrogance. In their desperate need to assert their superiority over a lesser species, they had just gleefully signed the death warrant for their entire civilization. Evan leaned back, the blue light of the hologram painting harsh shadows across his face. Earth had tried to be a savior. Now, they would have to be something else entirely. Evan's boots hit the permacrete of Earth's secure spaceport, but there was no press, no diplomatic debriefing, and no fanfare. Instead, black-clad operatives immediately escorted him to a hypersonic suborbital transport. Less than 2 hours later, he was plunging miles beneath the freezing, desolate surface of the Antarctic ice shelf. The descent elevator whirred with a low, metallic hum, the temperature dropping steadily. When the heavy blast doors finally parted, they revealed a sprawling, subterranean military command center that buzzed with a tense, chaotic energy. This was Sector 0, the absolute nerve center of human intelligence. General Vance, a veteran whose face seemed carved from granite and chronic stress, met him at the main gantry. They laughed, just as the strategic behavioral projections predicted, Vance stated, handing Evan a steaming cup of synthetic coffee. There was no outrage in the general's voice, no wounded pride. There was only the cold, mechanical satisfaction of a hunter watching a trap snap shut. Evan took a slow sip. 14:02, Galactic Standard Time. The Krillian chairman turned the anomaly projection into a holographic joke. Vance turned toward the massive central holotable, his eyes narrowing. Then the joke is officially over. Execute Operation Eclipse. There was no grand declaration of war. There were no fiery, impassioned speeches broadcast to the stars. Human history was full of screaming conquerors and loud, violent rebellions. But Earth had finally learned a terrifying new language. silence. At exactly 1800 hours, every deep space transmitter, every quantum communication relay, and every listening post from the orbit of Mercury to the frozen edges of the Oort cloud was violently severed. The ceaseless chatter of billions of human voices, the endless stream of commercial market data, the background radio hum of an entire, vibrant civilization simply ceased to exist. To the rest of the galaxy, the Sol system had just flatlined. But Earth did not merely pull the plug on their radios. Deep within the classified orbital foundries surrounding Neptune, massive gravity spinners roared to life. They wove a web of extreme spatial interference, a localized distortion bubble that aggressively wrapped around the entire solar system. To the highly advanced optical and gravimetric sensors of the galactic network, Earth did not just go quiet, it violently vanished. Where a bright, yellow star and its bustling planets once sat on the navigational charts, there was now only a terrifying, absolute void. It was a patch of pitch-black nothingness that swallowed starlight and spat out unreadable static. The silence was not just the absence of sound. It became a heavy, living entity, a psychological pressure cooker expanding outward into the cosmos. It took less than 48 hours for the paranoia to set in among the alien elites. The Krillian High Command, deeply irritated by this blatant show of disrespect from a lesser species, dispatched a wing of their elite Vanguard scout ships to investigate the blackout. The sleek, silver vessels streaked through hyperspace, expecting to find a dead world wiped out by a plague, or perhaps a cowed species trying to hide behind primitive jamming arrays. Instead, they hit a solid, invisible wall. It was not a wall of hard energy or dense matter, but a physical barrier of pure, unyielding spatial tension. The lead Krillian ship, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, bounced. The collision was completely silent in the vacuum of space. But the telemetry data sent back to the Krillian homeworld screamed in digital agony. The invisible wall repelled the vessel with a localized kinetic push, so incredibly violent that the ship's hyperalloy hull crumpled like thin paper. The inertial dampeners overloaded instantly, shattering the internal bulkheads. The remaining scouts frantically hit their emergency retrothrusters, hovering in absolute, terrified confusion before a barrier they could not see, could not touch, and could not understand. Their advanced scanners swept the dark void frantically, searching for an energy frequency, a magnetic wavelength, anything. They found absolute zero. It was a mathematical impossibility, an invisible shield that openly mocked their supreme intellect. They were locked out in the cold. The news of the impenetrable wall spread through the galactic intelligence networks like a virulent plague. In the midst of this cosmic whispering, Evan Burke was quietly stripped of his diplomatic credentials. He was no longer a messenger to an ungrateful galaxy. Standing on the primary observation deck of Sector 0, General Vance handed him a sleek, obsidian badge, bearing a single, intricate insignia. "You are the Dreamweaver now," Vance told him, the weight of billions of human lives resting on those few words. Evan looked down at the dark metal. He was now the supreme commander of the most audacious, desperate engineering project in the history of organic life. The absolute, suffocating silence stretched on. 10 days. 50 days. 100 days. The cosmic quiet became a deafening roar in the collective minds of the Galactic Council. And within that suffocating void, the horrific truth began to bleed into their reality. On the dawn of the 120th day of Earth's disappearance, the joke the Council had laughed at stopped being funny. The quantum tear, the exact anomaly Evan had meticulously charted, finally breached its critical threshold. Across the outer rim, 3 major hyperspace transit corridors simply evaporated in a violent storm of exotic particles. 7 massive merchant fleets, carrying the economic lifeblood of a dozen star systems, were shredded into subatomic dust without a single, fleeting distress signal. The crystalline trade hubs went dark as the very fabric of space-time unraveled beneath them. The Council realized, with a creeping, icy dread, that the primitive humans had not run away to hide. They had simply stepped outside the blast radius, deep within the shadow of the solar system's largest gas giant. The true scale of human deception hung suspended in the violent magnetic storms. For over half a century, humanity had played the part of the technologically stunted newcomer. They had gladly accepted the scraps of obsolete schematics tossed down by the Council, smiling politely while being treated as intellectual infants. But in the crushing darkness above Jupiter, hidden from all prying alien eyes behind the invisible wall of their own making, Earth had not been building primitive dreadnoughts or archaic laser batteries. They had been building a god. They called it the Loom. It was an orbital megastructure so impossibly massive that its skeletal framework spanned the entire circumference of the Jovian equator. Millions of miles of superconducting tethers, forged from ultra-dense carbon lattice alloys, plunged deep into the churning, high-pressure atmosphere of the gas planet. These tethers acted as colossal umbilical cords, siphoning raw kinetic energy and metallic hydrogen directly from the planetary core. The visual spectacle was staggering. Arcs of raw plasma, thousands of miles long, leaped between the structural pylons, bathing the metallic ring in a haunting, ethereal blue glow of Cherenkov radiation. While the Krillian architects boasted of their spatial weaving, they were merely surfing the cosmic waves, entirely dependent on the natural currents of the universe. The Loom was designed to boil the ocean. It was an engine of pure, unadulterated gravitational manipulation. By harnessing the immense baryonic mass of Jupiter and channeling it through perfectly aligned arrays of exotic matter, the machine generated localized singularities. It did not fire projectiles. It did not emit destructive beams of light. Instead, it possessed the terrifying capability to literally grab the invisible fabric of spacetime, fold it, stitch it closed, or violently rip it apart along the dimensional seams. It was a tool of ultimate creation and ultimate destruction. Evan Burke lived in the heavily shielded command module, suspended just above the lethal radiation belts of the Great Red Spot. He had not slept a full cycle in 40 days. Around him, tens of thousands of engineers, theoretical physicists, and heavy machinery operators pushed themselves past the absolute limits of human endurance. The environmental conditions were a constant, waking nightmare. Shielding panels constantly degraded under the heavy radiation bombardment, requiring desperate, round-the-clock maintenance. In the outer rings, workers in heavy, pressurized rigs welded quantum conduit relays, while fighting against gravitational shear forces that could snap a human spine like a dry twig. There were casualties, men and women who quietly suffocated when their tethers snapped and sent them plunging into the crushing depths of the gas giant, or whose neural pathways simply burned out from the sheer complexity of interfacing with the megastructure's mainframe. Yet, nobody stopped. Nobody complained. There were no strikes, no pleas for rest. They were driven by a singular, cold fury. The echo of alien laughter still rang in their ears, driving them to weld faster, to calculate harder. At the dead center of this colossal machine rested the core control device, designated as the needle. If the Loom was the raw, brute force muscle required to bend reality, the needle was the microscopic scalpel needed to make the precise, mathematical incisions. It was a dense, hyper-cooled sphere of stabilized dark energy, housed within a vacuum-sealed suspension chamber. It required absolute perfection. A single miscalculation in its calibration by even a fraction of 1% would not just fail to fix the anomaly. It would ignite a chain reaction that would swallow the entire solar system. Inside the primary tactical hub, The colossal holographic readouts painted a grim picture of the universe beyond their invisible shield. The quantum decay that Evan had predicted was accelerating exponentially, eating through the cosmos faster than even his initial, terrifying models had shown. The holographic map of the Galactic Transit Network was no longer just bleeding crimson. It was actively rotting. Entire sectors were blinking out of existence. According to the supreme mainframe calculations, the Galactic Council's infrastructure had exactly 30 days remaining before the cascade failure reached a point of absolute no return. Once that mathematical threshold was crossed, thousands of inhabited planets would be violently severed from the continuum. Their suns would be extinguished by the spatial collapse, and trillions of lives would be dragged screaming into an eternal, lightless void. The countdown clock dominated the central screen, its massive red digits ticking away the remaining seconds of an arrogant empire. Evan stood before the sprawling projection, his face illuminated by the dying light of 1,000 alien stars. His uniform was stained with engine grease, and his eyes were sunken, dark voids of utter exhaustion. Beside him, Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief architect of the tethering arrays, wiped a streak of blood from his nose, a common side effect of the frequent atmospheric pressure drops within the command module. "They are tearing themselves apart." "Sir," Eris said, his voice raspy from breathing recycled, metallic air. "The Krillian core worlds are experiencing total logistical collapse. They are starving. The communications we intercept are nothing but static and panic." Evan did not blink. He just watched the red lights fade into black on the display. "Director Burke." Eris hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly as he checked the final alignment diagnostics of the needle. "After everything they did, after the humiliation, the sheer arrogance, do they actually deserve to be saved? Why are we risking so many human lives, sacrificing our own people in this storm, to stitch their broken empire back together?" Evan turned his head slowly. The ambient light of the command center reflected off his eyes, making them look like polished, unforgiving steel. There was no warmth in his gaze, no lingering human compassion. "We are not saving them out of pity, Dr. Thorne," Evan replied, his voice a low, mechanical hum that cut perfectly through the background roar of the fusion reactors. "Mercy is a luxury for a universe that actually cares. If we let them die, they become martyrs of their own ignorance. They pass into history believing they were simply victims of a natural disaster." He reached out and placed his hand against the cold, reinforced glass of the observation deck, looking down at the violent, swirling storms of Jupiter. "But if we save them, we own them. When the loom stitches their sky back together, they will know that their survival is no longer a fundamental right. It is a privilege granted by Earth. We will not conquer them with fleets of warships or endless ground campaigns. We will save them from the dark, and in doing so, we will transform their entire civilization into an absolute, crippling dependency. We will hold the keys to their reality." Evan looked back at the colossal countdown clock. "Keep working, Doctor. Let them bleed for 29 more days." The grand hyperspace network of the Galactic Council did not merely break, it screamed. Across the vast, glittering expanse of the known universe, the invisible quantum corridors that had served as the absolute lifeblood of interstellar civilization began to snap like overtensioned wires. The collapse was not gradual. It was a sudden, violent severing of reality itself. Deep within the primary transit lanes of the Cygnus Reach, a massive convoy of heavy cargo haulers belonging to the Vexillium hives was caught mid-jump. These were gargantuan vessels, each the size of a small moon, carrying enough synthetic protein and raw energy cells to feed an entire sector for 6 months. In a blinding flash of violet radiation, the spatial tunnel completely collapsed around them. The physics of their immense momentum instantly conflicted with the sudden, jarring return of normal space. The physical hulls of the massive ships were not just crushed, they were unspooled. Titanium alloys and organic crew members alike were stretched into infinitely thin strands of subatomic matter, smeared across the cold void in a grotesque, completely silent explosion. Thousands of commercial fleets suffered the exact same fate within the first 48 hours. At the epicenter of the Galactic Empire, the Ethelgard Core Station, the legendary Building of Light, experienced something it had not felt in 10,000 years. It shuddered. The immense structural stabilizers groaned and shrieked under the violently fluctuating gravimetric waves rippling outward from the dying transit network. Inside the grand assembly halls, where multi-tonal laughter had once echoed so freely, there was only the frantic, overlapping shouting of desperate delegates. The cosmic economy completely evaporated in under 14 days. Planets entirely devoted to industrial manufacturing suddenly found themselves completely isolated, without raw materials or incoming food shipments. On the jewel world of Erissia, a planet whose entire surface was a meticulously manicured garden of high culture, the sky turned a bruised, sickening purple as their artificial atmospheric regulators failed due to lack of imported power. Billions of refined citizens, who had spent their entire lives debating abstract philosophy and creating art, were instantly reduced to rioting in the streets and clawing at the frozen earth for synthetic root fragments. Power grids failed across 1,000 star systems as the vital energy streams from neighboring suns were violently cut off. The interconnected utopian society was brutally exposed for what it truly was: a remarkably fragile house of cards waiting for a strong enough cosmic wind. The Krillians, the self-proclaimed supreme architects of the cosmos, fell into a state of rabid, panicked frenzy. Their absolute, unshakable certainty in their own technological supremacy proved to be their final, fatal blind spot. High above their gleaming homeworld, the supreme engineering castes deployed their most advanced spatial weavers in a desperate bid for survival. They launched tens of thousands of geometric drones designed to inject stabilizing dark matter directly into the fraying edges of the spatial anomaly. They truly believed they could forcefully command the universe to heal. Instead, their arrogant interference acted exactly like pouring highly volatile plasma onto a raging chemical fire. The Krillian stabilizing frequencies fundamentally clashed with the unique, erratic nature of the quantum tear. The exact moment their drones initiated the patching sequence, the localized tear violently inverted. It sucked the entire Krillian engineering fleet inward, crushing their elegant, crystalline ships into a microscopic singularity before detonating outward. This catastrophic backfire instantly expanded the destruction zone by another 300 light-years. Every single arrogant attempt they made to fix the broken network only massively accelerated the speed of their own impending annihilation. And then, the arrogance finally broke. It shattered into a million jagged pieces of pure, unfiltered terror. With their massive fleets vaporized, their heavily populated worlds starving in the dark, and their supreme leaders completely paralyzed by a reality of mathematical impossibilities, the galaxy looked toward the one place they had previously mocked. They looked toward the pitch-black void where the Sol system used to shine brightly on their navigational charts. The galactic communications grid, now heavily fragmented and relying on archaic, short-range burst transmitters, became completely flooded with a singular, desperate chorus. Millions of distress signals were fired blindly into the dark, anomaly-masking Earth. They were no longer speaking with the polished, condescending tones of supreme diplomats. They were weeping. The encrypted audio logs were filled with the terrified chittering of insectoid queens begging for safe passage. The frantic, bubbling pleas of aqueous governors promising the unconditional surrender of all their planetary resources, and the trembling, broken voices of Krillian senators crying out into the dark. They pleaded for the primitive, hairless apes to please answer them. They begged for the engineers of Earth to speak up, to save them, to do absolutely anything to stop the bleeding, trillions of miles away, completely shielded from the cosmic slaughter by the impenetrable wall of their own making. Evan Burke sat perfectly still, inside the heavily armored observation deck of the Loom, suspended high above the raging, toxic storms of Jupiter. The atmosphere was suffocatingly quiet. Spread across the massive curved display screens before him was a chaotic, high-definition tapestry of alien suffering. He was watching the intercepted visual feeds of burning planets, rioting alien cities, and the terrifying, silent destruction of the deep space transit lanes. The audio, from the millions of begging transmissions, was filtered through the command center's primary speakers, forming a low, constant drone of absolute, raw misery. Standing just behind his command chair, General Vance leaned heavily against the cold metal railing. The seasoned military commander watched the central tactical map, heavily noting the utter defenselessness of the Krillian home guard. "Director Burke," Vance said, his voice a gravelly whisper that barely broke the silence. "Their primary defensive grids are entirely offline. Their core fleets are either gone or paralyzed by the spatial tides. If we drop the veil and launch an offensive strike right now, we could take their capital world without losing a single drop of human blood. They are at their absolute weakest." Evan did not turn his head. He continued to stare directly into the holographic projection of a burning alien trade hub. The cold, blue light reflected sharply off his pale face, highlighting the deep shadows under his eyes. He slowly reached out with one finger and muted the main audio feed of the screaming delegates, cutting off their pleas in an instant. "No," Evan replied, his tone entirely devoid of any warmth or emotion. "Let them fear for one more day. Pure fear is the most enduring treaty." On the dawn of the 121st day, the absolute darkness broke. The impenetrable, invisible wall surrounding the Sol system did not shatter. It simply dissolved, peeling back like a heavy velvet curtain being drawn across a stage. The cosmic void where Earth had hidden its preparations was suddenly flooded with the dying light of the galaxy. But humanity did not surge forward with a massive armada of vengeance. From the depths of the recovered star chart, only a single vessel emerged. It was the heavy cruiser Vanguard. In a galaxy that prized flowing, bioluminescent curves and crystalline elegance, the human ship was an affront to aesthetic sensibilities. It was entirely blocky, brutally utilitarian, and forged from thick, unpainted slabs of cold gray titanium. It possessed exactly 0 weapon emplacements. There were no plasma batteries, no kinetic torpedo tubes, and no laser arrays. It was an armored brick of pure, concentrated purpose, propelled by a silent engine that left no radiation trail. Standing alone on the elevated command bridge, Evan Burke looked out through the reinforced viewport. The universe outside was tearing itself to pieces in a violent maelstrom of spatial decay. But the Vanguard did not tremble. It sailed directly into the heart of the quantum collapse, gliding smoothly through the jagged, ripping corridors of broken space-time. It was completely enveloped by a microscopic extension of the Loom. This invisible bubble of perfect gravimetric stability repelled the devastating spatial tides, allowing the human ship to effortlessly part the cosmic storm like a mythical leviathan parting a furious ocean. At the isolated, dying border outposts of the alien empires, the few remaining sensory operators stared at their screens in absolute, paralyzed disbelief. They watched a primitive metal box casually glide through gravity wells that had just pulverized their finest dreadnoughts. The Vanguard made no request for docking clearance when it reached the Ethelgard core station, the legendary Building of Light. Once the gleaming crown jewel of the Galactic Empire, was now a fractured, dying tomb. Its grand, luminous spires were flickering violently, choked by power failures. Thick, pulsing warning lights bathed the exterior hull in a sickly, desperate red glare. As the human cruiser engaged its magnetic docking clamps, the immense metallic structure of the station physically screamed. The titanic struts and bulkheads were loudly groaning, threatening to violently snap under the immense, crushing pressure of the encroaching quantum tear. When the heavy airlock hissed open, Evan stepped onto the station. He wore the exact same dark, pressed suit he had worn on the day of his humiliation. He walked slowly down the long, sterile corridors. The artificial gravity plated beneath his feet stuttered, but his stride never faltered. The rhythmic, heavy thud of his leather shoes echoed through the dying station, a steady drumbeat of impending judgment. He approached the colossal doors of the central chamber. 121 days ago, he had walked out of these doors, carrying the weight of universal mockery. Today, they slid open to reveal a scene of absolute, pathetic desperation. The grand amphitheater was completely engulfed in bedlam. Hundreds of high delegates, once draped in the arrogant finery of their supreme races, were reduced to shouting animals. They clawed at one another, screaming over the failing acoustic amplifiers, desperately fighting for non-existent evacuation priorities. The elegant Krillian chairman sat slumped on his elevated throne, his obsidian eyes wide with sheer panic as chunks of the ornate ceiling rained down around him. Then, a single insectoid ambassador from the Vexillium hives turned toward the entrance. Its mandibles froze mid-click. The silence spread like a contagion. It rippled through the panicked mob, a cold wave of realization that instantly extinguished the chaotic shouting. One by one, the mighty rulers of the cosmos turned to look at the entrance. The gelatinous envoys stopped bubbling. The heavy gravity warlords stopped shoving. They parted instantly, stumbling backward to clear a wide, terrified path. They stared at the small, hairless ape, walking calmly through the red emergency lighting. They did not look at him with pity. They looked at him as if he were an ancient, wrathful god who had just casually strolled out of the abyss. Evan did not look at them. He did not acknowledge their trembling forms, nor did he offer a single syllable of greeting or gloating. He walked with absolute, chilling authority directly to the center of the room, ascending the exact same podium where they had once projected a dancing monkey. Reaching into his pocket, Evan withdrew a small, heavy object. He gently placed it down onto the metallic surface of the podium. The solid, authoritative click of the metal making contact was the loudest sound in the entire chamber. It was a perfect, flawless black cube, utterly devoid of any seams or lights. It was the miniaturized, heavily shielded control terminal for the needle. The fate of the entire known universe now rested entirely upon a block of dark matter, no larger than a human heart. A deafening crack split the air. The massive, transparent dome overarching the central chamber splintered, sending jagged spiderwebs of failing energy across the ceiling. The shrieking red emergency klaxons hit a fever pitch. Automated voices blared in 100 different languages, warning that the station had exactly 3 minutes before total structural failure. The localized gravity plating began to heave. Absolute pandemonium erupted. The once dignified delegates threw themselves over their curved desks, trampling one another in a blind, pathetic stampede toward the sealed exit doors. Evan Burke did not flinch. He stood perfectly still in the center of the madness. He raised one hand and tapped his index finger against the cold surface of the black cube. The station's central translation matrix, entirely hijacked by the Vanguard's localized network, amplified his voice to a bone-rattling volume that instantly overrode the alarms and the screaming. Earth demands supreme, uncontested control of the Galactic spatial network, Evan said, his tone as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. Cast your votes right now, or we all vanish together. High above the chaos, gripping his crumbling podium, the Krillian chairman roared. His crystalline armor was cracked, his regal composure entirely gone. You are bluffing, human! You would not trade the lives of billions just to steal our authority. You are playing a trick. As if the universe itself sought to answer the chairman's accusation, a massive section of the high ceiling finally gave way. The metal shrieked and peeled outward. The absolute vacuum of the dying void ripped into the chamber. A terrifying hurricane of depressurization swept through the upper tiers. 3 high-ranking Krillian delegates were violently lifted from their feet, screaming soundlessly as they were sucked out through the breach and swallowed instantly by the blackness of the tear. The remaining delegates froze in sheer, unadulterated horror, clinging desperately to the floor grates. They looked at Evan, fully expecting the human to leverage this terrifying display, to shout another threat, to demand their immediate compliance. But nobody could have predicted the human's next move. Evan Burke did not raise his voice. He did not point a commanding finger. Instead, he simply pulled his hand completely away from the black cube. He let his arms drop loosely to his sides. He took a slow, deep breath, and he peacefully closed his eyes. He stood there, fully exposed, entirely willing to let the void consume him right alongside them if they chose stubborn pride over survival. It was a display of psychological pressure, so immense, so utterly alien to the Council's understanding of self-preservation, that it completely broke them. The realization crashed down upon the assembly. The human was not bluffing. Earth was fully prepared to let the galaxy burn to ash if they were denied the throne. The automated countdown voice echoed through the chaotic winds, declaring only 10 seconds remaining before the station was pulled completely into the quantum singularity. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. The insectoid Vexillium ambassador was the first to smash its heavy claw onto the voting console. The gelatinous envoys followed, slamming their appendages onto the glowing panels. 7 seconds. 6 seconds. A tidal wave of panic-driven submission swept through the chamber. Finally, trembling violently, the Krillian chairman reached out with a fractured, translucent finger and pressed his console. 0 seconds. The entire amphitheater suddenly flared with a blinding, uniform sea of blue light. It was the color of unanimous, unconditional surrender. Evan opened his eyes. He calmly reached forward and pressed his palm flat against the black cube. An invisible, immense wave of stabilizing gravimetric energy instantly pulsed outward from the tiny device, linking perfectly with the godlike power of the loom millions of light-years away. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. The horrifying screech of tearing metal ceased abruptly. The gravity plating locked back into a perfect, soothing hum. Outside the fractured dome, the violent, swirling crimson storms of the quantum collapse simply stopped. The frayed edges of space-time were violently pulled back together and stitched perfectly smooth, leaving only the calm, starlit canvas of the normal universe. A new silence descended upon the grand chamber. But this was not the silence of a dead radio. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of absolute worship and pure, unadulterated terror. Hundreds of alien eyes stared at the small man in the dark suit, realizing exactly what they had just agreed to. Evan picked up the black cube, feeling its heavy, cold weight. He turned his back on the glowing blue sea of surrender and began the long walk back toward his ship. As his footsteps echoed in the quiet hall, a profound, heavy sorrow settled deep within his chest. In that fleeting moment, he realized that humanity had survived, but they had permanently lost their innocence. By stepping forward as ruthless saviors, holding a gun to the head of reality itself, Earth had won the ultimate war without firing a single bullet. Yet in doing so, they had forever become the most logical, calculating, and terrifying monsters this universe had ever produced. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are listening to this story from today, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed our tale today, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the donation QR code on your screen. or by using the donation link provided in the description and pinned comment. Your incredible generosity is what allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and empowering us to continue creating even better stories for you to enjoy. Thank you again, and see you in the next adventure.